The Biden administration also paid Iran $6 billion to release 5 of our prisoners, didn't it? Do you believe in the tooth fairy?
Ultimately, if we cut off those banks, they will no longer be able to make money.
Do you believe in the Easter Bunny?
So, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the Biden administration has operated as Iran's best friend, hasn't it?
No, I disagree completely, Senator.
Well, Iran sold Iraq $10 billion, not million, $10 billion worth of electricity. But Iraq couldn't pay them because of our sanctions against Iran. The Biden administration waived those sanctions, didn't it?
Senator,
so that Iran could get $10 billion. Isn't that a fact?
No, Senator. Those waivers started under the Trump administration. That money is still in Iraq. That money has never been to Tehran. It will never go to Tehran.
The first waiver was on July 2023, wasn't it?
Senator, I believe those waivers started in 2018.
The first waiver that the Biden administration did was July of 2023, wasn't it?
So, Senator, again, I believe the waiver program started in.
You didn't issue a waiver on July of 2023.
Senator, the waivers were continued into 2023.
And you issued another waiver to get the money to Iran in November of 2023, didn't you?
Senator, as I said, that money has never been, will never go to Iran. The money is still in Iraq. The money may be used for humanitarian purposes, but not a dollar of that money.
And you issued another waiver on March of 2024, not too long ago. That was 6 weeks after Iran killed 3 American soldiers. Senator, you gave Iraq permission to give Iran $10 billion, didn't you?
No, Senator. As I mentioned, this was something that started in 2018 under the Trump administration. It allowed Iraq to purchase electricity and to store that money in Iraq. None of that money to date will ever go to Iran. The money is being held for humanitarian purposes.
You're not telling the truth, Mr. Secretary. No disrespect, but that's just not true. Senator Menendez and Senator Scott made the point. We all know, unless you peaked in high school, you know that money is fungible. The Biden administration also paid Iran $6 billion to release 5 of our prisoners, didn't it?
Senator, again, that money is in Qatar. None of that money has been used. It hasn't been moved. And as I said earlier, while money is fungible in the United States because we care about our people, it's not fungible for the Iranians.
So the money's in Qatar, in a bank in Qatar?
Yes.
Now, what do you think? Who controls that bank in Qatar?
Those banks are controlled by those individuals who run that financial institution.
I see. So if President Biden says Qatar Bank, don't give this money to Iran, and the Qatar government says give the money to Iran, who do you think the Qatar Bank's going to listen to, Mr. Secretary?
So, Senator, those banks in Qatar value greatly their ability to have a relationship with the United States because that's how they make money.
Do you believe in the tooth fairy?
Ultimately, if we cut off those banks, they will no longer be able to make money.
Do you believe in the Easter Bunny?
So, Senator, while I understand your point, fundamentally, none of that money has gone to Iran, and that money is not going to go directly to Iran.
Now, you did the same thing with Maduro, you meaning the Biden administration. You guys did the same thing with Maduro in Venezuela. You removed all the sanctions on oil and mining, including gold, with Maduro, the dictator of Venezuela, didn't you?
So GL 44 and 43 were put in place in Venezuela. 43 has already...
Is that a yes?
GL 43 has been removed.
Yeah, so you said, okay, Maduro, we're going to remove Maduro, best friends with Iran and Cuba and China and Russia. The Biden administration removed the sanctions on oil and mining in Venezuela. Senator. And Maduro said, I promise you that I'll hold a free and fair election. And then he put all his opponents in jail. And the Biden administration has done nothing, hasn't it, except stand there sucking on its teeth.
So, Senator, I want to say again, we provided general licenses. We did not remove the sanctions. The reason we did that was because we did not trust. So what we can do
The
with those
sanctions on Maduro's oil are not there, are they?
General License 44, which gives permission for the sale of oil, expires on April 17th, which will then put those sanctions back in place. We did not remove the sanctions.
The problem you folks have is that you want to quote Socrates in the middle of a bar fight. Iran is not our friend. Venezuela is not our friend. President Biden keeps giving them money to buy weapons to try to kill us.
Senator,
do you not understand that?
Sanctions on the Iranian regime. We have not allowed a dollar from Qatar or from the Iraqi electricity fund to flow to Iran.
That's just not true. Senator Menendez explained that to you. How can you be that obtuse?
Senator, as I've said, our goal is to make sure that we take every action to prevent Iran's destabilizing activity in the region. We're going to continue to go after Iran's sale of oil and try and limit their ability as best we can using the tools that you've given us. I'm here before the Senate asking for additional tools that will allow us to continue to do that.
Senator Vance of Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Deputy Secretary for being here. I would ask just a couple of questions about our sanctions regime and potentially, efforts within this body to really ramp up that sanctions regime. So, you and I believe, discussed last year, excuse me, how the sanctions on Russia after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, what effect they were having on the Russian economy, what effects actually matched our expectations, and what effects didn't match our expectations. We're a little further down the road here. It's April of 2024. Do we have a good sense of how the Russian economy did in 2023 and how effective the sanctions were or were not at inhibiting Russian growth?
We have a better sense now than we did earlier this year. And to answer your question, Senator, I think what we have found is that the Russian economy has largely transitioned to a war economy, where all the tools of production have went from building out a diversified economy that was styled for long-term growth to one that is driven by a short-term need to build as many weapons as possible to further their war aims in Ukraine.
And what did their GDP grow last year? Do you know?
Their GDP, I believe, grew somewhere in the neighborhood of 1% to 2%.
Okay, which is, frankly, at or above some of our European allies. And I really do worry here, and I agree with you that they've transitioned their economy to a war footing. That has its own internal momentum. And one of the things I worry, I know this isn't your area of focus, one of the things I worry some of my colleagues underappreciate is that war footing has a certain momentum to it. And we should be trying to arrest that war footing as much as possible, not leaning into it and prolonging this thing, because I worry that once Russia becomes an economy that only works in a time of war, that actually makes it more likely and that they're going to show aggression now and in the future. I want to sort of transition, and Mr. Secretary, how aware are you of the REPO Act, REPO, that's sort of moving through this chamber? Are you sort of aware broadly with its outline?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So one of the things that does, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm trying to sort of think through my own view on it, but one of the really worrying provisions is that, as I understand it, it would actually freeze the current sanctions regime that we have on Russia in place legally as an act of Congress. And so if a future president or a second Biden term wanted to change that sanctions regime, they would need an act of Congress to do so. Is that correct?
I'm not certain of that provision. My understanding is that it gives the president certain authorities. I don't know that it freezes the current regime.
Okay. That's my understanding at least, but I think worth having a follow-up conversation, and certainly my staff will follow up as well on that particular topic. Here's the thing that I worry about. I imagine that we have different preferences for who wins the next presidential election, Mr. Secretary. But whether it's a President Biden or a President Trump, I think it's really important for the next administration to have diplomatic flexibility to negotiate what will certainly, I think, be an end to the Russia-Ukraine war, whatever end that ultimately takes. I hope to God that it doesn't last another 5 years. And what I worry about with the Repo Act is that we actually, if we are freezing the sanctions regime, we prevent the president from having an important tool at his disposal and actually negotiating a peaceful settlement to that conflict. Let me ask just one final question on the Repo Act. As I understand it, it would give it would effectively force asset seizure of all Russian assets. And I'm wondering, have we done that in a time of peace with a country that we're not directly at war with? Have we ever done something like what the Repo Act envisions?
So, Senator, the one thing I am clear of is that my understanding, at least, is the Senate version of the Repo Act gives the president the ability to, doesn't require him to do so. And I think part of the reason for that is because we know that the vast majority of those assets are in Europe, and we'd only want to act alongside our European allies if we did something like that. In terms of seizing the assets against a country that we're not engaged in hostility against, I don't know that we have done something like that at this juncture.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. And with that, I yield the remainder of my time. Thanks for being here, and thanks for answering my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will get right to it. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation. Is there any doubt in your mind that the Iranian regime is the largest state sponsor of terrorism against the United States and our allies across the globe?
None, Senator.
None. So when we look at this, I take a step back and kind of it's frustrating for me because I see this administration take a posture of appeasement. When I'm looking at it, you look from the decline of the strategy of maximum pressure under the previous administration to kind of where we are now. And I'm thinking if we all agree that Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism, why wouldn't we be using every tool in our toolbox to make sure that we prevent them from benefiting financially? And so we've seen Iran's oil profits soar since January 2021, reaching over $80 billion and counting, and its steel exports have actually increased twofold. So I guess my question is, has the Biden administration's enforcement authorities, have your sanctions enforcement authorities been limited at all since you've gotten to Treasury?
No, Senator. We've put in place 571 sanctions against the Iranian regime, and I know that we've spoken personally about what's happening with steel, where we've sanctioned the top steel producers in Iran, and the steel they're selling today is illicit and illegal. We have to do more and must do more to cut off that illicit transaction, but those companies have been sanctioned by us.
So let's talk about the steel specifically. What more do you think we could be doing? What tools do you need, or could we use at a greater level in order to crack down on that?
So, Senator, one of the things we have to do and that we are doing is working closely with the intelligence community to find out how they're illicitly selling what is illegal steel at this point, to go after those nodes that are helping them to do that. So what you should expect is we're going to continue to take actions there. One of the reasons I'm here, though, is that you mentioned oil. And while Iran is selling oil, one of the challenges they're having is getting the money back to Iran, given what we're doing in the financial sector. The thing that I am worried about is that Iran will increasingly turn from using the formal financial sector to move their assets and increasingly use cryptocurrency because we don't have tools
If
there.
you just look at where you are right here on, so if you look at, we hit Iran's oil, you mentioned the oil exports receipt, they reached a 5-year high last year of $42 billion compared to, if you look at the 2020 numbers, $7.9 billion. What do you attribute to that difference?
One of the things that the Iranians are increasingly doing is they're consistently looking for ways to do everything from ship-to-ship transfers, using the gray fleet, using intermediaries to try and sell their oil. While we've put in place more than 500 sanctions against Iran, what we're finding is that the Iranian regime, given their desperate need for cash, is doing things to try and get around our sanctions. So we're going to continue to use our sanctions authorities, but ultimately that is going to continue to make it more costly for Iran to try and get around them, but they're going to continue to try.
Are there any kind of, given the data points of this past year and it being a high versus where we were in 2020, are there any tools in your toolbox that you're not using to the fullest extent possible?
So, Senator, I think the thing that I've asked my team to do is to come back to me and talk about what else we can do. And I think the key for us is not only what the United States can do, but how do we build an international coalition, frankly, because one of the things that we benefited from in the past was that it wasn't just the United States acting, but we were acting alongside our allies and partners. And while today we've been able to get other countries to come alongside actions we've taken against UAVs when it comes to Iran and some of their military components, we've been less successful in terms of going after their petrochemical industry. So I think part of this is a diplomatic effort to get other countries to join us in taking those actions, because what Iran is doing is that they're moving their petrochemical industry into the shadows, and they're doing things that have fewer touch points with the U.S. dollar, which is the thing that I can use. So we need to get other.
Are there loopholes specifically that they're using with regards to Russia and China that where we need to close those?
So in terms of the petrochemical industry, they're actually a competitor to Russia because fundamentally they're selling the same thing on the market. So I think they are not working together in this space. I think from my standpoint, we're using the tools that you've given us to try and impact them using our dollar-based tools, but they're often trying to transact in ways using everything from fund companies to other currencies that require us to build a broader coalition.
So last thing, I only have a few seconds left. When you look at the switching gears at the Corporate Transparency Act for small businesses, what are you doing to ensure small businesses are aware of those new reporting requirements?
One of the things I'm personally doing is speaking to small business interest groups and talking to them about what we can do to try and make sure that the small businesses they represent know about the act. And I think one of the things that we would appreciate is working with your offices so that we can go back to your district offices and do presentations about how small businesses can sign up. Fundamentally, what we know is that the vast majority of small businesses throughout our country want to do the right thing, will want to sign up. And by doing that, it allows us to find those illegitimate small businesses that are often creating threats. So I'm happy to work with your office to set up webinars in your district, to send people down to your states to help make sure your small businesses are aware. But we're launching an all-out campaign to make sure that small businesses throughout the country are aware of the need to register.
Excellent. I just want to make sure that they have that outreach. So look forward to working with you on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.